Welcome to Symphony of Love. Enjoy this brief yet charming introduction to our romantic comedy, where unexpected twists and heartfelt moments await. Let the show begin. Lavinia Redmayne was running late, again. She dashed across the bustling lobby of Boston's Meridian Grand Hotel with a clipboard tucked precariously under one arm and a half-eaten bagel in hand, attempting to avoid colliding with the incoming tide of conference guests. At 27, she was juggling two major goals in life, finishing her shift as an assistant event organizer without tripping over her own feet and pursuing her secret dream of becoming a stand-up comedian. On this particular morning, Lavinia's schedule was even more frantic than usual. She had volunteered to manage the arrivals for the annual Bloom and Grow Charity Ball, a glittering event known for attracting Boston's elite. But beneath the polished exterior of sponsorship banners and ornamental bouquets, Lavinia suspected chaos lurked around every corner. A floral vendor had delivered the wrong color roses, the DJ had somehow managed to blow a fuse in the banquet hall, and a high-strung benefactor was already threatening to withdraw her donation if she didn't get the seat with the best view of the stage and zero glare on her diamond earrings. Clutching her phone, Lavinia scrolled through an endless list of tasks when she heard a shrill voice call her name. Spinning around, she saw her friend and fellow organizer, Darby Fox, sprinting in her direction. Darby had bright turquoise hair and wore a glittery headset. She looked frazzled enough to set off a full-scale panic. Lavinia! Darby gasped, skidding to a halt so abruptly that her neon sneakers squeaked against the marble floor. The caterer is stuck in traffic. The lead soprano thinks the sound system is giving her allergies, and Ms. Voss, remember the one with that enormous cat rescue foundation, she's livid because we ran out of vegan pastries in the VIP lounge. Lavinia's eyes widened. Vegan pastries? I thought we had at least 24 in stock. We did, Darby moaned, but the film crew for that cooking show in Ballroom C ate them, thinking they were part of the buffet. Stifling a groan, Lavinia checked the time on her phone, wincing at the digital clock. All right, I'll see if I can sweet-talk the hotel bakery into whipping up a new batch. Just keep Ms. Voss occupied, feed her compliments or show her pictures of cats, whatever it takes. Darby saluted dramatically before darting off, leaving Lavinia to navigate a chaos that felt equal parts comedic routine and borderline disaster. She rushed to the front desk, praying the chef on duty might save the day. But in her haste, she slammed straight into a tall, dark-haired man carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Oof! She stumbled backward, her bagel dropping onto the gleaming tiles with an unceremonious splat. Papers in her arms fluttered down around her like confetti. Oh, I'm so sorry! Lavinia exclaimed, flustered. She stooped to retrieve the wayward sheets of paper, her cheeks growing warm with embarrassment. No harm done, came a smooth voice above her. He knelt down, scooping up a stray pamphlet advertising the night's silent auction. You look a bit overwhelmed. Are you all right? Glancing upward, she found herself staring into the kind, amused eyes of Marchand March Bishop, a well-dressed stranger whose tailored suit and polished shoes suggested he might be one of those VIP guests or possibly an extremely dashing media mogul. She couldn't be sure. Either way, he had that faint aura of effortless charm she rarely encountered outside of a rom-com. Yes, Lavinia stammered, wrestling her paperwork back into a messy stack. I'm good. Sorry I nearly ran you over. This event is just, a lot. March handed her the last flyer, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Well, I'd say I've faced more dangerous collisions. He extended a hand to help her up, and she accepted, feeling an odd jolt of gratitude. What's got you in such a hurry? Lavinia gave a tiny, breathy laugh as she regained her footing. I'm the assistant coordinator for tonight's charity ball, and everything that can go wrong is going wrong. If I don't fix at least a dozen issues in the next hour, I might end up the city's biggest flop in event planning history. Also, I lost my breakfast, so my morale's in short supply. She glanced mournfully at the fallen bagel, and March chuckled. Tough break. Let me guess, you're the miracle worker behind the scenes who ensures everything looks perfect to the audience, while you run around backstage in total chaos. That's basically my job description, she said, stuffing the pamphlets under her arm. I'd apologize again for plowing into you, but ironically, this might be the calmest part of my day. Now, if you'll excuse me, she motioned to slip past him, but hesitated, eyeing him a bit closer. Something about the warmth in his gaze made her want to linger. You're attending the gala, aren't you? March shrugged, the corner of his mouth quirking up. I am indeed. I'm here on behalf of the Bishop Foundation. Big donations, schmoozing, all that jazz. Lavinia's eyebrows lifted. The Bishop Foundation? As in, the major sponsor for the refurbishment of the city's public libraries. He nodded, and she felt a strange relief flood through her. Perhaps it was comforting to know that he wasn't just a random hotel guest but actually part of the event. I'm Lavinia, by the way. Event staff. And part-time stand-up comic, on a good day. March offered a quick, courteous bow. March Bishop, full-time mischief maker, part-time philanthropic darling, or so my PR team tells me. Pleasure to meet you. He glanced at the battered remains of her bagel. Shame about your breakfast. Maybe you'll let me replace it with a real meal sometime. Her cheeks flamed at the suggestion, uncertain if he was serious or simply teasing. That's kind of you, but today might not be the best day. I have to make miracles happen, he finished, raising an eyebrow in playful challenge. Fair enough. But I'll be around. My foundation has a reception desk in the corridor outside the ballroom. If you need help or, a stable meal, come find me. Before Lavinia could respond, Darby reappeared at the end of the lobby, frantically waving for Lavinia's attention. Lavinia gave March a quick, apologetic smile. Duty calls, again. He stepped aside gallantly, letting her pass. Good luck, Ms. Redmayne. I have a hunch we'll be seeing each other again before the night is over. She nodded, a sudden flutter in her stomach as she hurried away. Her mind buzzed with the press of tasks and crises waiting to be solved, yet an odd glimmer of excitement pulsed beneath the chaos, an inkling that maybe, just maybe, she'd stumbled upon someone unexpectedly genuine in this swirl of high society demands and showy benevolence. Lavinia made her way to the hotel's main ballroom to quell the next wave of emergencies, heart-pounding. Though her life was a storm of comedic disasters and endless to-do lists, a small part of her dared to wonder if a spark of romance had just been lit. After all, if stand-up comedy had taught her anything, it was that the most unpredictable moments often sparked the best stories, and something told her that meeting March Bishop was only the opening act of a grand, heartwarming performance that would sweep her off her feet in more ways than one. Barely 5 minutes had passed since her encounter with March Bishop when Lavinia found herself dashing into the hotel's main ballroom, nearly slipping on a stray power cable as she tried to locate Darby. Streams of staff members in crisp uniforms hurried around, adjusting floral centerpieces, testing microphone levels, and praying the entire production wouldn't devolve into a well-publicized fiasco. Lavinia couldn't decide which crisis to tackle first, the pastries that needed replacing, the cracked ice sculpture lurking behind a velvet curtain, or the diva-like tantrums from the gala's most demanding headliner. Darby caught sight of Lavinia and rushed over, brandishing her clipboard like a shield. The turquoise-haired organizer looked as though she might spontaneously combust from stress. The pastry chef is still stuck in traffic, and Ms. Voss is becoming more volcanic by the minute, Darby whispered, casting a panicky glance across the ballroom. She keeps cornering random staff to rant about how malnourished she's feeling. If we don't feed her soon, she might start yelling at the donors, which is the last thing we need. Lavinia sucked in a breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She remembered March's parting words about being available if she needed help, but she wasn't quite sure how a philanthropic sponsor could rescue them from a pastry shortage. Let's see if the hotel bakery can pull off a miracle, she said, mentally rehearsing her best begging tone. In the meantime, distract Ms. Voss with talk about her cat rescue. Pretend we're planning a special kitty-themed fundraiser next month, anything to keep her happy. While Darby dashed off to smooth ruffled feathers, Lavinia hurried backstage, navigating a maze of stacked speakers and precariously perched spotlights. An ear-splitting shriek erupted from the far corner. Lavinia followed the sound and discovered the gala's star soprano, Annalise Di Fiore, throwing a dramatic fit. The singer was a petite woman with an operatic presence that filled the entire backstage area, even without a microphone. Unacceptable. Annalise raged, stomping a dainty heel on the floor for emphasis. There's a draft coming from the side exit, and it's going to ruin my voice before the second aria. Lavinia mustered a sympathetic smile. We'll see what we can do to seal the doorframe. Or perhaps we can move a space heater near your dressing area. A space heater? I refused to sing while sweating like a marathon runner. The soprano's eyes widened in horror as if Lavinia had suggested belting out a tune in a sauna. Fix the draft or I walk. Suppressing a groan, Lavinia nodded. Give me 5 minutes to handle it. She hurried away, scribbling a frantic note on her notepad: seal backstage exit door, no space heaters, no meltdown. She made a mental calculation of her to-do list, which now felt a mile long. On top of everything else, she still had to check on that unfortunate ice sculpture no one seemed brave enough to approach. Perhaps if she just kept moving, she might survive the night. As she was about to enlist a maintenance worker for the draft issue, her phone buzzed. It took her a second to realize it was the same device she'd nearly dropped earlier when bumping into March. Surprised, she looked at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. I asked Darby for your contact. Not sure if you want company, but it looks like you could use some help with your pastry predicament. March. Blinking in disbelief, Lavinia typed a quick reply: how on earth could you help with pastries? The response came almost immediately: let me worry about that. Meet me in the lobby in 10. Despite her skepticism, curiosity tugged at her. March had struck her as resourceful, not to mention well-connected, so maybe he could pull a rabbit out of a hat and solve the vegan pastry crisis. After confirming that a maintenance crew member would handle the draft situation for Annalise, Lavinia made a break for the lobby. She found March waiting near a lavish indoor fountain, looking perfectly at ease amid the flurry of guests and staff dashing from one problem to the next. He held a phone to his ear, rattling off instructions in a calm, authoritative voice that hinted at his business acumen. As soon as he spotted Lavinia, he wrapped up the call and offered a warm smile. Good timing, he said, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. You're not going to believe this, but I have a friend whose family runs a bakery specializing in vegan desserts. They're only a few blocks away, and they owe me a favor. They can crank out a fresh batch if we pick it up within the next half hour. Lavinia gawked, relief and disbelief battling for control of her expression. Are you serious? This might actually save the entire gala. March chuckled. I try not to joke about pastries, especially when they're urgent. Come on, I'll give you a ride. My driver's out front, and we can be back before Ms. Voss starts planning a boycott. Something about the confidence in his voice and the kindness in his eyes drew Lavinia in. Swallowing any last remnants of professional pride that suggested she should handle every crisis alone, she nodded. You're a lifesaver. Let me just text Darby so she doesn't think I jumped ship. Moments later, the two of them were slipping past the grand revolving doors to find a sleek black sedan idling at the curb. The driver opened the rear door, and Lavinia slid in first, heart racing with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. While she fumbled with her seat belt, March settled in beside her, phone in hand to coordinate details with the bakery. The ride to the bakery felt surreal. Instead of the comedic mayhem she was accustomed to, Lavinia found herself momentarily cocooned in quiet, gazing out the car window at downtown Boston's hustle. Moonlight glimmered on the skyscrapers as they zipped through city streets. Every so often, March would exchange a small smile or remark about how unbelievably calm she appeared, considering the avalanche of problems waiting back at the gala. She took it as a compliment, albeit one that didn't fully reflect the thundering of her pulse. When they reached the bakery, a cozy establishment run by a gregarious woman named Iris, who greeted March with a playful scolding for not visiting sooner, Lavinia helped load a dozen boxes of freshly prepared vegan pastries into the trunk. Her mind spun at how quickly he'd orchestrated this rescue mission. She had expected the rest of her night to be a series of frantic apologies to disgruntled donors, yet here was March, turning potential catastrophe into a solvable errand. Back at the hotel, Lavinia felt a surge of triumph when she saw Darby wave wildly at her from across the foyer, relief etched into every line of her expressive face. Ms. Voss's meltdown might just be averted. Though the event still needed ironing out, Annalise and her draft, that cracked ice sculpture, and myriad other hiccups, one crisis no longer loomed over them. And, she noted with a flicker of gratitude, it was all thanks to the unassuming kindness of someone she'd met only hours ago. As March helped carry boxes into the VIP lounge, their eyes met in an unspoken moment of camaraderie. Lavinia felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. She'd been so focused on pulling off a flawless event that she hadn't paused to think about forging genuine connections. But now she sensed a spark, like a comedic setup waiting for the perfect punchline, promising something far deeper than a fleeting giggle. Before she could overanalyze that thought, Ms. Voss descended upon the pastries with unabashed glee, praising their quality as if they'd been handcrafted by angels. Lavinia flashed March a look that managed to convey both profound relief and a silent "thank you." He shrugged modestly, stepping back to let the flurry of well-heeled guests taste-test the salvaged buffet. For a moment, she had to resist the urge to grab his hand, drag him aside, and gush about how grateful she was for his help. Instead, duty called again. Another staff member beckoned her from the far side of the lounge, whispering about a newly arisen lighting emergency. As she hurried away to extinguish the next fire, Lavinia couldn't help but cast one last glance at March. He was chatting politely with a pair of donors, yet his gaze flickered to meet hers. The soft curve of his smile hinted that this was only the beginning of whatever unexpected story fate had decided they would share. She exhaled, feeling invigorated. If the rest of the night continued on this trajectory, she would need all the comedic timing she possessed, and maybe, for once, a little luck in the love department, too. Serafina hadn't slept a full night in weeks. Anxiety and exhaustion tugged at her constantly, but the moment she finally sat down on her sofa with an armful of prenatal books, she wondered if she'd ever feel normal again. She stared at the worn copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting, a gift from her cousin who knew nothing of her predicament, and felt her stomach twist with dread. The book offered practical advice for a standard pregnancy, but her situation was anything but standard. 3 babies. 3 tiny heartbeats fluttering inside her. Just the thought made her feel simultaneously awed and overwhelmed. She laid a protective hand on her abdomen, remembering the day she'd first confirmed her suspicion. She had nearly fainted in the doctor's office when the ultrasound technician quietly said, "I see 3 gestational sacs." The phrase played on a loop in her mind, taking her right back to the cold jelly on her belly and the frantic pounding of her heart. Her first reaction had been denial. Surely there was a mistake in the machine, an echo or glitch. But the images were clear, and the technician's smile had been one of gentle certainty. Triplets. The immediate fear that followed that realization was almost paralyzing. How could she possibly afford this? She made a modest living as a freelance graphic designer, occasionally supplementing her income by teaching weekend art workshops to kids at the local community center. She had no trust fund, no supportive parents, no family home to run back to. The only person who should, share the responsibility was Marchand Bishop, the elusive billionaire with whom she'd had one extraordinary, impulsive night. In the aftermath of that night, she'd told herself it was a fling, a fleeting spark of passion in a life otherwise ruled by caution. She had slipped out of his penthouse while the city still slept, convinced their paths would never cross again. He was from a world of polished fundraisers and private jets, far removed from her routine of tight budgets and public transportation. So she had tried to forget him, burying the memory of his magnetic smile and the dangerous thrill that pulsed between them the instant they'd locked eyes. But life had other plans. Now, each week brought another wave of reminders that she was in way over her head. Nausea at odd hours. Doctor's appointments that drained her savings. The creeping realization that, at some point, she would have to tell him. Whether or not he wanted the burden of fatherhood, March deserved to know. And deep in her heart, she wondered if he would even remember her name, or if he'd simply assume she was angling for a slice of his fortune. That fear kept her from reaching out at first, as did the secret hope that maybe she could raise the babies on her own. But with every flicker of movement in her belly and every late-night anxiety spiral, she understood she couldn't do this alone. She needed help. She needed a plan. The first step was to figure out how to contact March at all. She had no direct line, no personal email. She only had faint scraps of information, the name of his company, the glossy headlines that hailed him as some wunderkind entrepreneur and philanthropic powerhouse. She typed Marchand Bishop into search engines, scanning countless articles about his latest acquisitions, expansions, and rumored girlfriends. His face appeared in dozens of press photos, sharp features, confident gaze, perpetually flanked by bodyguards or business partners. The mere sight of him on her laptop made her breath catch. Would he even remember her? She tried to talk herself out of it every time she drafted an email to the general info address for Bishop Enterprises. Yet, late one night, after another dizzy spell and a jolt of fear at how unprepared she was, she hit send. The message was succinct, perhaps too succinct. She mentioned that they'd met under memorable circumstances, that she had something urgent to discuss, and asked for a private meeting. She didn't say anything about the babies. Not yet. Days ticked by. She checked her inbox obsessively. Nothing. No reply. The churning panic threatened to become despair until, at last, an email arrived from a Mr. C. Radcliffe, who introduced himself as March's personal assistant. The tone was polite but businesslike, asking Serafina to confirm her identity and reasons for contacting Bishop Enterprises. She took it as a spark of hope. It meant March had at least read her note, or someone close to him had. Summoning courage she never knew she had, Serafina wrote back, explaining just enough to convey the gravity of the situation without spilling every detail. She stared at the screen for hours, weighing every word, terrified that if she said too much, March might dismiss her as a gold digger. Eventually, the assistant replied with a single line that made her heart thunder. Mr. Bishop is available for a discreet meeting this Friday at 10 a.m. Please confirm your attendance. The following days were a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. How would she explain this? Should she hand him the ultrasound photos? Would he even believe her? She imagined 100 different scenarios, the worst one being that he'd casually offer hush money, instructing her to disappear from his life forever. But she also couldn't help entertaining the faintest glimmer of a dream that maybe, somehow, he'd care. That maybe there was more to him than a playboy persona and an insatiable business drive. Finally, Friday dawned. Serafina found herself standing outside Bishop Tower, the glass monolith that rose above the city skyline with quiet arrogance. Her reflection stared back at her, reminding her she was just a small figure dwarfed by corporate might. With a trembling hand, she smoothed her blouse over her tiny but growing bump. A jolt of protectiveness rippled through her. She wasn't just doing this for herself, 3 tiny hearts depended on her bravery now. Steeling her nerves, she stepped into the sleek lobby, half expecting security to turn her away. Instead, a poised receptionist led her to a private elevator, which whisked her up to the executive floor in utter silence. Her heart hammered louder than the hum of the machinery. When the doors slid open, she was greeted by a man in a suit, Mr. Radcliffe, presumably, who motioned for her to follow him. They walked past walls of smoked glass and modern art, every detail echoing opulence and power. At last, they reached a set of tall doors. Radcliffe opened them, gesturing for her to enter alone. The office beyond was spacious, bathed in sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows. And there, behind a massive desk of polished wood, stood Marchand Bishop. He was even more striking in daylight, his silhouette outlined by the city skyline. Her pulse thundered as she met his gaze, unsure if he recognized her instantly or needed a moment to place the face of a one-night stand. But the slight lift of his brows, the parting of his lips, yes, he remembered. She could see it in his expression, a flash of shock, then something unreadable. Serafina clutched her purse strap with white-knuckled intensity, her entire world balanced on the razor's edge of that moment. And then March spoke, his voice low but firm enough to reverberate through her. "I got your message." She swallowed hard, forcing the words from her dry throat. "I'm sorry to barge in like this. But we need to talk." Before he could respond, she took a trembling breath, her hand reflexively drifting to her abdomen. She didn't know how to say it gracefully, how to reveal that in the span of a single night, they had become bound forever by 3 fragile new lives. Part of her wanted to run, to escape before she saw rejection in his eyes. But as he stepped toward her, the sleek perfection of his office swirling around them, she realized there was no turning back. So Serafina braced herself, telling the babies in her heart to be strong, and finally forced out the words that would change both their lives. "I'm pregnant, March. And it's yours." Lavinia led March behind the side curtains, where a cluster of stagehands was gathered around the malfunctioning spotlight. She could see the telltale flicker dancing across the stage, an intermittent pulse that had the potential to drive the keynote speaker to distraction. A tall technician with grease-stained fingers nudged a metal ladder into place, muttering about blown fuses as he tested the circuit board for the 3rd time. Despite the rising tension, Lavinia felt a slight thrill that March was still at her side. Normally, she would have been handling all of this on her own, scrambling to fix the issue while simultaneously calming the rattled nerves of any big-name participant about to step onto the stage. Yet there he was, a calm pillar in the swirl of stage lights, orchestrating solutions as if it were second nature. They conferred with the technician, who finally determined that the spotlight's internal wiring had overheated from being at full intensity for too long. Another staff member had already dashed off to retrieve a backup, but installing and testing that spare device would take at least 10 minutes. Lavinia's heart sank. The keynote speaker was set to go on in half that time, and if the spotlight wasn't stable, the entire show would look amateurish at best, or risk plunging the stage into partial darkness at worst. March seemed to read her mind. He tapped on the phone in his hand and spoke quietly into it, likely to some contact who could expedite a fix. Within a minute, he'd arranged for an electrician from the hotel's maintenance crew to rush over with additional tools. Lavinia marveled at his efficiency, but a flutter of anxiety still nagged at her. Time was short. She hurried back into the main ballroom to find the gala's MC, a flamboyant local radio personality named Gemma Lang, desperately stalling on stage with jokes and anecdotes. The audience, a mix of dignitaries, well-heeled donors, and philanthropic socialites, seemed mildly amused for now, but Gemma's eyes sparkled with a trace of desperation. Lavinia exchanged a quick thumbs-up with her from the side of the stage, attempting to project confidence she didn't quite feel. Darby materialized behind Lavinia with a furrowed brow. "I just got cornered by Ms. Daxton. She's fuming because she's been assigned a seat behind a pillar. She says she can't see the stage unless she cranes her neck, and she's threatening to take back her pledge if we don't fix it. Also, Ms. Di Fiore is wandering around backstage wearing half her costume. I'm not sure if she's decided to help the stagehands or if she just got lost." Lavinia let out a breath and checked the time on her phone. "Okay," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Go talk to Ms. Daxton and see if we can move her a few seats. I'll keep an eye on Ms. Di Fiore. If she's interfering, I'll guide her back to her dressing room." Just make sure she doesn't walk on stage early or we'll have a soprano cameo during the keynote." Darby saluted with mock gravity and dashed off. The entire gala felt like an elaborate juggling act, and any dropped ball threatened to cause a chain reaction of guest displeasure. Lavinia turned just in time to see March emerge from behind the curtains, motioning at her with a relieved grin. A replacement spotlight had been set up, and the crew was fine-tuning the lighting so the keynote speaker could deliver his address without blinking like a strobe effect. A shaky wave of relief coursed through her. She escorted March back to the control booth, where the lighting director confirmed that they were ready to go. Through the glass, they could see Gemma on stage, still chatting away as if the show were a televised special. Lavinia signaled for the MC to wrap up the stall. Her heart skipped a beat when March placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, leaning in to speak just low enough for her to hear. "You're handling this like a pro," he murmured. "Seriously. I've been to countless events, and most planners would be crumbling by now. You're everywhere at once. Feels like I'm about to sprout wings just to keep up," she admitted with a small laugh. "But I have to say, you're making it easier. I didn't expect, well, any of this help." He offered a humble smile. "I've spent too many years watching events go sour because no one stepped in when they could. Besides," he added, his voice quiet and earnest, "I'm enjoying this more than any cocktail conversation in the VIP lounge." Her cheeks warmed at the sincerity in his tone. For a moment, she allowed herself to bask in that soft glow before the reality of her job pulled her back. Gemma introduced the keynote speaker, a prominent tech mogul known for his philanthropic ventures, and the man strode confidently to the podium. Lavinia watched, nerves on edge, as the new spotlight shone smoothly on him, highlighting his polished grin. The crowd applauded, and all seemed well. With one crisis resolved, Lavinia and March made their way around the perimeter of the ballroom, ensuring no new trouble brewed. Servers whisked by with trays of sparkling drinks, and the gentle hum of polite laughter filled the air. Ms. Voss was still happily indulging in the vegan pastries, Ms. Di Fiore had apparently returned to her dressing area, and Ms. Daxton, newly seated in a better location, had quieted her protests. It was as if the gala had finally found its rhythm. Pausing near a marble pillar, Lavinia let out a long, slow exhale. "We did it. Or at least, we're doing it." March inclined his head toward her, his eyes reflecting the flickering chandeliers above them. "I'd say you're doing it. I'm just supporting from the sidelines." She shook her head. "You're too modest. You're basically an undercover superhero. If there's a meltdown, you pop up out of nowhere with a solution. I'm starting to suspect you have a secret lair." A husky laugh escaped him, and his hand brushed hers in the briefest of touches. "No secret lair. Just a strong belief that no one should face chaos alone." He hesitated, then added, "Especially not someone as dedicated," his gaze flickered over her face. "And captivating as you." Heat crept up her neck again, and Lavinia found herself momentarily at a loss for words. The hush of the surrounding gala seemed to amplify the intensity of the moment, like they were stepping into a bubble of calm amid the swirl of tuxedos and glittering dresses. She might have lingered in that feeling if not for Darby's abrupt reappearance. "There you are." Darby hissed, trying, and failing, to hide a knowing grin when she noticed how close March was standing. "We have a teensy snafu with the silent auction forms. Some guests are complaining they can't see their bids because the lights by the auction tables are too dim." Lavinia inhaled, collecting herself. "We'll handle it." She turned to March, an unspoken question in her eyes. He answered with an easy nod. "Lead the way." And so they moved on, side by side, to tackle the next hurdle. While the night was far from over, something within Lavinia felt lighter, as though a door to a new possibility had swung open. For the first time, the chaos of an event seemed almost fun. And in that chaotic orchestra of demands and near disasters, March Bishop was quickly becoming the sweet melody she hadn't expected but could no longer ignore. As soon as the keynote speaker concluded his rousing address, applause swept through the ballroom like a rising tide. Lavinia exhaled, relieved that the spotlight fiasco had been resolved just in time for his big moment. All around her, donors began rising from their seats, drifting toward the lavish buffet tables or meandering over to the silent auction area, where glass display cases showcased luxury vacations, signed memorabilia, and exclusive dining experiences. From a distance, it all looked smooth and glamorous, until she remembered the urgent complaint about the dim lighting that made it hard for guests to read their bidding sheets. She glanced at March, who had remained at her side throughout the address, and steeled herself for yet another sprint through the crowd. Together, they navigated the throng of elegantly attired patrons, their chatter punctuated by the soft clink of champagne flutes. An inward smile tugged at Lavinia's lips when she noticed how naturally March adjusted his pace to hers, as though they'd been working together for years. He occasionally exchanged polite greetings with attendees, but his focus remained on her and whatever new mini-crisis needed solving. When they reached the silent auction tables, Lavinia quickly spotted the problem. An entire row of overhead lights had dimmed, leaving a shadowy stretch right over some of the event's most expensive items. A few guests were already squinting at the bid sheets, and at least one gentleman fiddled with his reading glasses in frustration. Darby stood nearby, brandishing a flashlight from her phone to illuminate the piece of paper a guest was signing. Lavinia approached her friend, eyebrows raised in concern. "Please tell me there's an easy fix for this," she said softly, nodding toward the shadowed section. Darby grimaced. "Apparently, the circuit for these lights got overloaded, and the hotel's electrician says it'll take at least half an hour to replace or reset. Some problem with the wiring, again." While Lavinia frowned, March stepped forward with a thoughtful expression. "Half an hour is too long if we want people bidding now. Let's see. We could ask the hotel staff to bring over some portable lamps. Maybe those tall, decorative floor lamps from the corridor would at least brighten the area a bit." Darby's face lit up. "That's actually a great idea. I'll grab a couple of interns and have them haul the lamps over." She gave Lavinia a quick squeeze on the shoulder. "You keep these folks calm. I'll be back in 10. As Darby hurried off, Lavinia and March moved between the silent auction tables, politely apologizing to disgruntled bidders. An older woman with elaborate pearl earrings huffed in exasperation as she tried to decipher the printed details of a wine-tasting trip. Lavinia leaned in, quietly summarizing the highlights of the package. The woman's stern expression softened enough for her to jot down a bid, albeit with a martyred sigh. "That's it, folks," Lavinia said to a small knot of attendees, trying to muster a bright, reassuring voice. "We're bringing in lamps to fix the lighting situation. Thank you for being patient, your contributions mean the world to our charity partners tonight." The murmurs of annoyance gradually quieted as the crowd resumed perusing the items. March stationed himself at the edge of the tables to field any new complaints, and, to her relief, he diffused tension with a few well-placed jokes and an easygoing smile. In that moment, Lavinia couldn't help admiring how seamlessly he balanced his poised, businesslike demeanor with genuine warmth. For someone used to formal galas and corporate events, he certainly knew how to connect with people on a more personal level. Within minutes, Darby reappeared alongside two interns hauling ornate floor lamps, their gilded bases clinking on the marble floor. While they arranged them along the shadowed stretch of the auction tables, Lavinia spotted Ms. Daxton approaching. Even from several feet away, she recognized the woman's impeccable coiffure and a certain discontent in her stride. Steeling herself, Lavinia put on her best professional smile. "You managed to fix my view of the stage," Ms. Daxton began, adjusting the fringe on her designer shawl, "but now I can't read the fine print on these silent auction disclaimers. I do hope you're not trying to swindle us with hidden fees." March stepped forward, voice smooth and reassuring. "I promise you, Ms. Daxton, everything about these items is transparent. Let me walk you through any details you're curious about." He extended an arm with practiced courtesy, guiding her gently toward the newly lit portion of the table. Lavinia watched, a quiet spark of gratitude flickering in her chest. March's willingness to absorb some of the emotional labor usually thrown entirely at her feet was more than welcome, it was downright disarming. She found herself thinking that, if this evening were a comedy set, he'd be the spontaneous partner on stage who kept her from floundering when a joke fell flat. With Ms. Daxton momentarily placated, Lavinia took the chance to catch her breath. She surveyed the now illuminated table, the shimmering crystal lamps casting a warm glow. Darby mouthed a triumphant "all good" from across the crowd. Lavinia nodded, feeling a small surge of satisfaction at how they'd handled yet another hurdle. As the evening's pace ebbed for a moment, March guided Ms. Daxton back toward the center of the ballroom. Along the way, he made sure to wave in Darby's direction, indicating that the problem was under control. Then he returned to Lavinia, a light smile dancing on his lips. "So," he teased, "did we just score an extra donation from Ms. Daxton by explaining away hidden fees that never existed?" Lavinia snorted softly, stifling her laughter to maintain some semblance of composure. "I think we might have. She made a note on her check and thanked me twice, might be the biggest compliment I've ever received from her. I owe you one, or maybe several." He tilted his head, that same earnest look illuminating his gaze. "You owe me nothing. Although, if you ever need an opening act at your comedy gigs, I could offer some witty one-liners." A playful wink followed, making her heart flutter. She had never explicitly mentioned her comedy dreams at length, but she'd given him a glimpse of her aspirations earlier. The fact he remembered, and took interest, set off an unexpected warmth in her chest. Before she could respond, the orchestral ensemble stationed near the ballroom stage struck up a lively tune, signaling the start of a short intermission performance. Conversation in the crowd shifted gears as people turned their attention to the musicians. March leaned closer to Lavinia, just enough for her to catch the subtle cologne he wore. "Want to take a breather for a moment and watch the performance?" he asked, voice tinged with genuine enthusiasm. "Or do you need to dash off to the next issue?" Lavinia hesitated. Part of her wanted desperately to say yes, to stand beside him and savor the music for a minute, letting the swirl of responsibilities fade. But as she scanned the room, she spotted an approaching figure, one of the event's biggest donors, who seemed to be searching for an organizer. She recognized the stern expression, it was the face of a wealthy patron who'd found something else to grumble about. She locked eyes with March, a trace of disappointment flickering over her face. "I should probably handle this," she said, nodding subtly in the donor's direction. "Rain check on that breather?" His understanding smile was immediate. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside so she could greet the man. "I'm not going anywhere. Good luck." With that, Lavinia steeled herself and wove through the sea of gowns and tuxedos to address the next crisis. Still, an unfamiliar sense of lightness accompanied her, fueled by the knowledge that she wasn't alone in the chaos. Even as she braced for another storm of complaints, her thoughts kept drifting back to March, the easy companionship, the saving graces, and the way he made her feel as though every stumbling block was just a punchline away from a well-earned laugh. Somehow, amid the pressure of orchestrating a flawless gala, it was that growing connection with him that left her truly breathless. And as she prepared to calm yet another restless benefactor, she couldn't help but hope that this crazy, exhilarating night might be the opening act to a much more captivating story, one in which the curtain would fall on comedic mishaps and rise on a stage set for genuine romance. Lavinia wrapped up her conversation with the disgruntled donor, a minor dispute over tax deduction forms, quickly smoothed out by providing an extra sheet of paperwork, and allowed herself a fleeting sense of accomplishment. At last, most of the urgent fires appeared to be under control. Ms. Daxton was appeased, Ms. Voss had pastries aplenty, and even the icy swan sculpture seemed to be holding on under the gentle breeze of carefully positioned fans. The sweet strains of the orchestra filled the ballroom, and clusters of guests mingled in good spirits, dropping fresh bids in the silent auction. Yet Lavinia couldn't entirely relax. Each time she checked her phone, a flurry of new texts and notifications awaited. Darby kept relaying updates. Half the dinner staff was anxious that the main course might be delayed. Ms. Di Fiore was rehearsing in a corridor again, complaining the backstage lounge felt too stuffy, and another big donor had unexpectedly shown up with additional guests in tow, requiring a last-minute scramble for extra seating. But despite all this, Lavinia had to admit that things were running far better than she'd dared to hope. She glanced around in search of March and spotted him halfway across the ballroom, near the grand piano. To her surprise, he was deep in conversation with a tall, silver-haired man whose impeccable posture and polished demeanor suggested an air of old-money confidence. The older gentleman wore a tailored tuxedo and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being in control. Curious about the interaction, Lavinia edged a bit closer, weaving between clutches of partygoers sipping champagne. Catching sight of her, March gave a subtle nod in greeting, then introduced her with that trademark warmth in his voice. "Lavinia, this is Conrad Bishop, my father. Dad, meet Lavinia Redmayne. She's the event coordinator who's keeping this entire gala from collapsing." Lavinia fought the urge to fidget, aware of Conrad's appraising gaze. It felt strangely more intimidating than any of the scowls from demanding donors she'd dealt with that evening. She extended a hand politely, offering a professional smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bishop. I hope you're enjoying the event." He accepted her handshake with a polite nod, though his expression was difficult to read. "Likewise, Ms. Redmayne. My son has spoken very highly of your organizational prowess." Her cheeks warmed at the implication that March had been singing her praises. "I'm grateful for his help tonight," she said, hoping to strike a balanced tone of humility. "I really don't know how we would have pulled off a few of these minor miracles without him." Conrad arched a brow in March's direction. "Yes, well, he does have a habit of swooping in when chaos calls. Must be the adrenaline rush." There was a hint of good-natured teasing in his voice, but something else lingered, an undercurrent that Lavinia couldn't quite name. March offered a light shrug, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Dad's here as part of the Bishop Foundation's commitment to arts and education," he explained. "He's been making the rounds with the other major donors." Conrad's steady gaze lingered on Lavinia for a moment longer before he turned his attention back to his son. "I'm meeting with a few potential partners for our library expansion project. You're welcome to join us, March. We still need to finalize next quarter's philanthropic itinerary." The unspoken suggestion that March should step away from playing stagehand hung in the air. Lavinia felt a twinge of unease, afraid that her presence might be pulling March from responsibilities more aligned with his usual philanthropic roles. She cleared her throat and mustered a friendly, professional smile. "I don't want to keep you from important business. Thank you both for your support of tonight's cause." She started to excuse herself, but March stopped her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Hold on," he said, looking at his father. "Give me a minute to finish up here, and I'll catch up with you in the VIP lounge." Conrad's eyes flicked from Lavinia's face to March's resolute expression. With a polite, mildly disapproving nod, he offered a goodbye and strode off into the crowd. The moment he vanished from sight, March let out a quiet sigh. Lavinia couldn't help noticing the tension in his posture. "Sorry," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should have mentioned my father might be here tonight." She waved off the apology. "It's your family foundation sponsoring half of this gala's initiatives, right? It's only natural he'd come. Is everything okay between you two?" March hesitated, then gave a half-hearted smile. "He's not a bad man, just very particular about how things should be done. He's used to me playing the role of philanthropic heir, mingling with wealthy donors and forging big deals, not darting around solving logistical snags." His eyes darted to the spot where his father had disappeared. "He might view my hands-on approach as a bit frivolous." Lavinia felt an unexpected pang of empathy, recalling how her own family had questioned her career in event planning, especially her comedic ambitions. "But that's what I appreciate about you," she said, keeping her voice low amid the hum of the crowd. "You're not content just shaking hands in a VIP lounge. You actually help make things better right where the trouble is." His gaze locked onto hers, warmth softening the tension in his features. "Thanks. That means more than you know." For a lingering moment, neither of them spoke, the music from the orchestra and the voices of guests creating a gentle backdrop. Then, with a small exhalation, he smiled. "Anyway, enough about family politics. You've still got a million things to juggle, I'm sure." She glanced at her phone, noticing another series of texts from Darby. "You're not wrong," she admitted. "I should check on Ms. Di Fiore's readiness for her final number. And apparently one of the dinner courses is missing a garnish, which is apparently a catastrophe." She made air quotes around the word with a dry chuckle. March let out a soft laugh. "Gotta love the drama of high-stakes cuisine. Let me know if you need me to wrestle up some parsley or something." Despite the stress simmering beneath the event's polished surface, Lavinia found herself smiling, a genuine, broad grin that felt out of place among the night's usual forced politeness. "I will. And hey," she added, lowering her voice, "don't let your father's expectations stop you from enjoying this. We make a pretty good team, and I'd like to finish out the evening that way." He nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "We will." Gently, he brushed his fingers against her forearm, a brief but reassuring touch that sent her pulse skittering. Then, with a parting smile, he slipped into the crowd, presumably to handle foundation matters, or perhaps to calm Conrad's skepticism. Alone again, Lavinia composed herself and headed toward the corridor where Ms. Di Fiore had last been spotted. She found Darby halfway there, green-blue hair visible from across the room as she spoke to a frantic stagehand. When she caught sight of Lavinia, her gaze darted meaningfully toward a closed door. Ms. Di Fiore locked herself in the supply closet, Darby whispered in an exasperated hush. She said the dressing room was too hot, and she needed a space that was perfectly insulated. But now she can't figure out how to unlock it from the inside. Lavinia sighed, pushing aside her momentary bubble of warmth from talking to March. "I'll handle it," she said, squaring her shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle. "Just let the orchestra know we might need a minute before her final performance begins." Darby nodded and stepped away, returning to the stage to stall if necessary. Lavinia approached the supply closet door, pressing her ear against it. Sure enough, she could hear muffled opera scales drifting through the wood. In any other circumstance, it might have been comical to find a world-class soprano practicing in the dark with brooms and spare cables. But given the precarious timetable, she didn't want to risk Ms. Di Fiore's final act getting postponed, or cancelled due to claustrophobia. She knocked softly. "Ms. Di Fiore? It's Lavinia. I'm here to help you get out." A dramatic gasp sounded from inside. "Hurry, please. There's barely any room in here to breathe, and I'm worried the dusty air will ruin my voice." Lavinia bit back a laugh. "I'll have you out in a jiffy. Try not to panic." She retrieved the master key from her lanyard, thankful the hotel had provided organizers with such access. A swift click, and the door swung open to reveal the singer, still in costume, cheeks flushed pink from the stuffy closet. "Oh, thank heavens," Ms. Di Fiore exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest. "I feared I might miss my cue." Refraining from pointing out that it was her own decision to hide in a supply closet, Lavinia offered a reassuring nod. "The audience is eager to hear your final aria, so let's get you backstage quickly." She guided the soprano toward the nearby dressing rooms, feeling a passing wave of relief that this particular crisis had been solved with minimal damage. While Ms. Di Fiore rushed to grab her water bottle and sheet music, Lavinia glanced at the time. Only 15 minutes remained until the evening's finale, a number that would showcase the soprano's acclaimed vocal range, followed by a grand applause that typically marked the gala's peak of donations. If all went well, they'd wrap up the night's main program without another calamity. But as she escorted Ms. Di Fiore to her place in the backstage queue, Lavinia's thoughts slipped to March. She wondered if Conrad had demanded an urgent meeting, or if March was quietly handling his father's concerns with the same grace he'd shown all evening. Despite the comedic absurdity of each new mishap, her mind kept returning to the genuine connection sparking between them. Even more surprisingly, the knowledge that they would soon emerge from this chaotic swirl felt almost bittersweet. She wasn't quite ready for the night to end. With Ms. Di Fiore finally settled and the orchestra wrapping up their current piece, Lavinia sensed that the final act was nearly upon them. The silent auction would close soon, donation tallies would be announced, and the guests would shuffle out to their limousines, either dazzled or drained. Bracing herself for the final stretch, she stepped aside to observe the stage from the wings. There, amid the chaotic swirl of staff, volunteers, and last-minute instructions, she spotted March lingering at the edge of the curtains. He offered her a quick wave. Even from a distance, that small gesture carried a warmth that steadied her heartbeat. She wanted to walk over to him, maybe even steal a moment to ask how his conversation with Conrad had gone, but an insistent whisper from a stagehand pulled her back to the present. Ms. Di Fiore was ready for her entrance, and Lavinia needed to confirm the lighting cues. So she remained where she was, monitoring the transitions with practiced focus. As the music began, Ms. Di Fiore stepped onto the stage in a swirl of shimmering fabric. Her voice soared, silencing the crowd with its breathtaking clarity. Just like that, the pulse of the gala seemed to slow, hearts collectively moved by the sheer artistry unfolding in front of them. And behind the scenes, Lavinia realized she, too, was caught up in the moment, grateful not only for the night's relative success, but for the unexpected turn her path had taken the instant she nearly knocked March Bishop off his feet. This was no longer just a fundraiser or a star-studded gala. For her, it had become something more, a stage for the possibility of a deeper connection, illuminated by the same spotlight they had fought so hard to keep shining. Applause erupted the moment Ms. Di Fiore's final note hovered in the air, a testament to the sheer power of her voice. Lavinia couldn't help smiling as she peeked from the wings, watching the soprano bask in the admiration of a mesmerized audience. For all the diva moments and last-minute panics, Ms. Di Fiore had delivered a showstopper that left the gala's guests utterly spellbound. When the singer blew a gracious kiss to the crowd, people rose from their chairs for a standing ovation. The collective energy was electric, and Lavinia found herself briefly forgetting every frantic moment that had led up to this finale. Gradually, the applause subsided. The MC returned to the stage to announce the closure of the silent auction, encouraging donors to submit their final bids before the official tally. House lights brightened, transforming the ballroom from a theatrical performance space back into a grand reception hall. Lavinia exhaled, feeling an edge of relief. The night's biggest performance was safely behind them, and all that remained was to wrap up the formalities, a task she hoped would be straightforward. She headed backstage, where Ms. Di Fiore was glowing with triumph, lavish gowns sweeping the floor. A small cluster of admirers offered bouquets and congratulations. Lavinia slipped through the well-wishers to express her own thanks. "That was magnificent," she told the soprano, making an effort to project genuine warmth. "We're so grateful you could perform tonight." Ms. Di Fiore tipped her head with regal pride. Despite all the minor inconveniences, she said in a tone suggesting those inconveniences had been enormous, it was a successful evening. "I trust the donors are quite pleased." "Very," Lavinia assured her. She felt a flicker of wry amusement, recalling the closet fiasco. At least Ms. Di Fiore seemed to have forgotten that embarrassing moment, unless she preferred to pretend it had never happened. After all, they had come out on the other side with a breathtaking performance, and that was what truly mattered. Leaving Ms. Di Fiore to revel in the adoration, Lavinia slipped into the corridor leading back to the ballroom. Her phone buzzed with another text from Darby: "Something weird is happening with the top auction item." Big confusion at the bidding table. Need you ASAP. A spike of anxiety sharpened her focus. She quickened her pace and emerged into the main hall, scanning the crowd for any sign of commotion. Near the silent auction station, she spotted Darby, hair a neon beacon in the sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. The expression on her face said everything: trouble had definitely found them again. As Lavinia approached, she noticed two elderly patrons arguing in hushed but heated tones over a painting displayed on a polished easel. Both clutched bid sheets, each claiming to have the winning offer. Off to one side, a tense-looking staff member tried to mediate, while other guests looked on, clearly intrigued by the spectacle. Lavinia's stomach lurched. She recalled that the painting, an original from a sought-after artist, was one of the ball's star items. If this dispute went sideways, it could cast a shadow over the entire fundraiser. Darby hurried over, muttering under her breath. They both insist their bid was higher, but the system only shows one final amount. Something about a smudged zero. I have no idea who's telling the truth. I tried to calm them, but they're threatening to pull out of other bids if we don't sort this out fast. Lavinia steeled herself, crossing the short distance to the feuding patrons. Good evening, she began politely, maintaining a professional smile. I'm Lavinia Redmayne, one of the event coordinators. Let's see if we can resolve this calmly. May I take a look at your bid sheets? Both guests thrust their paperwork at her. The older gentleman wore gold-rimmed spectacles, while his rival was a petite woman with diamonds that glittered against her dark gown. Indeed, there seemed to be a discrepancy. His form indicated a final bid of $10,000, while hers appeared to read $100,000. Yet the latter's zero was faint and almost smeared, suggesting it might have been altered or misread at some point. Tension buzzed between the pair like static electricity. Just then, March stepped forward. He looked from the painting to the quarreling donors, then caught Lavinia's eye. Need a second opinion? He asked quietly, his expression calm despite the friction crackling in the air. Relief spread through Lavinia. Please, she said, holding out the forms. Let's see if we can clarify the actual bid. March took the sheets and studied them, then glanced up at the painting. Could there be a simple explanation, such as a pen malfunction? He asked the patrons. Neither seemed eager to admit a mistake, each insisting they had the correct final amount. Sensing the standoff, Lavinia cleared her throat. I suggest we compare times. Each bid sheet has a timestamp. If the $100,000 was placed after $10,000, then it stands. If not, we default to whichever entry was last. They scrutinized the stamps. Indeed, the large figure had been written about 30 seconds after the other. The woman gave a small, triumphant smile, while the gentleman's face darkened. He began to sputter about unclear handwriting and exorbitant sums, but ultimately, he yielded. The staff member swiftly recorded the valid bid in the system, and Darby discreetly stepped in to thank the patrons for their generous support. When the man turned away, huffing under his breath, Lavinia braced for further fallout. Instead, March took the opportunity to steer the situation toward a more positive note. We're sincerely grateful for both of your bids, he said in a measured tone. Though it seems there was confusion, your generosity will make a substantial difference for the charity. If you'd still like to contribute at the $10,000 level, I can personally ensure that donation is recognized among our highest-tier sponsors. The gentleman's indignation wavered. Looking mollified, he straightened his lapels and grumbled, well, perhaps that would be acceptable. Lavinia bit back a relieved sigh, wondering if March always handled chaos with such deft diplomacy. As the two patrons moved on, Darby mumbled a quiet, thank you, and rushed off to finalize the remaining auction items. Lavinia lingered by the painting, allowing herself a moment to breathe. I swear, she whispered to March, this night is determined to throw every curveball imaginable. He gave a low chuckle, returning the bid sheets to the staff member. At least we're knocking them out of the park together, he said. You did great. They shared a brief, meaningful silence that hummed with mutual respect, and something warmer, more personal. Lavinia felt a sudden rush of gratitude, not just for the fact that the painting fiasco had been resolved, but for the way March continued to show up whenever she found herself at the edge of another crisis. She half expected him to be called away by his father at any moment, yet here he stood, unwavering. Her phone buzzed again, jolting her from the moment. A quick check of the screen showed a text from the gala's accountant. The final donation tally was in, and it was a record-breaker. Lavinia's heart soared. She looked up, locking eyes with March, and recognized a similar spark of excitement in his gaze. He gestured toward the stage. "We should announce this right away, don't you think?" Nodding, she motioned for him to follow her. "Absolutely. Let's give these guests the good news they've been waiting for." And so, together, they wove through the crowd once more, the renewed sense of accomplishment fueling each step. For just a moment, she let herself imagine a future beyond tonight, a future in which they might do more than merely fix catastrophes side by side. Perhaps, just perhaps, the unexpected partnership they'd forged in the heat of chaos was becoming something stronger, something that could outlast even the most dramatic gala. Lavinia waited in the wings, adrenaline thrumming through her veins as the MC tapped the microphone, calling the attendees back to their tables for the evening's grand conclusion. The hush in the ballroom felt charged, as though the entire room braced itself for the final announcement of donation totals, an eagerly anticipated drumroll of philanthropic success. Even though her phone buzzed non-stop with last-minute questions from staff, should the dessert buffet remain open during the announcements? Is Ms. Daxton demanding a spotlight for her personal speech? She forced herself to remain calm. This was it, the culmination of every frantic hour, every carefully coordinated detail. And she wasn't alone. March appeared at her side, his presence a steady counterpoint to the low-grade panic that still simmered in her chest. When he offered a subtle nod, she felt her breath steady. They had made it this far as a team, there was no reason to doubt they could handle whatever came next. The MC's cheerful voice boomed across the room, welcoming Lavinia onto the stage. As she stepped out beneath the bright lights, applause rippled through the audience. She wore a modest black dress that had somehow remained unscathed by the night's many close calls, though she couldn't say the same for her hair, which had gradually slipped from its neat updo. Still, the applause felt like a balm on her frazzled nerves. Over at the silent auction area, Darby waved encouragement, turquoise hair gleaming under the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lavinia began, trying to keep her tone measured but enthusiastic, "what a spectacular evening this has been. Your generosity and commitment have helped us break every fundraising record in this gala's history." A fresh ripple of applause followed, and she caught the pleased smiles of several major donors. Without further ado, she continued, "It's my honor to share the final total for tonight's contributions." She glanced at March, whose confident grin gave her the extra boost she needed. Reading from the figure displayed on her phone, she announced the sum. Gasps and delighted exclamations erupted throughout the room. People clinked glasses and turned to one another with proud smiles, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire ballroom was suffused with triumph. Lavinia suppressed a wave of happy disbelief. This was the kind of success every event organizer dreamed of. As she stepped back from the microphone, March took her place, offering a few gracious words on behalf of the Bishop Foundation. His poise was effortless. Even in front of a crowd, he seemed as relaxed as if he were talking to a close friend. Lavinia watched with admiration as he thanked the sponsors, praised the artists, and specifically acknowledged the tireless work of the organizing staff. She felt her cheeks warm when he singled out one of the most dedicated and resourceful event planners I've ever worked with, Ms. Lavinia Redmayne, prompting another round of applause. Right then, a figure emerged from the audience and walked toward the stage, Conrad Bishop, March's father. Lavinia tensed. After their earlier encounter, she wasn't quite sure how he felt about her or his son's hands-on involvement. But to her surprise, Conrad approached the microphone with a dignified smile. Clearing his throat, he briefly commended the generosity of all in attendance and then turned his attention to Lavinia. "I've seen many events in my years," Conrad began, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent a lifetime in boardrooms, "and I can say with confidence that tonight's gala exceeded expectations in every possible way. As someone who's invested in philanthropic endeavors for decades, I've learned that the difference between success and failure often lies in the details, and those details depend on leadership. Ms. Redmayne, you have impressed me with your resourcefulness, your calm under pressure, and your devotion to this cause." Lavinia's heart pounded. She stood frozen at the edge of the stage, unsure where he was heading. Even March appeared taken aback by his father's uncharacteristically warm tribute. Conrad continued, "In recognition of such excellence, the Bishop Foundation would like to pledge an additional donation in your name, directed toward the educational scholarship program you mentioned so passionately. We believe it will help expand opportunities for students interested in pursuing creative careers, such as event planning, performing arts, or even stand-up comedy." A soft laugh rippled through the crowd, and Lavinia's mouth nearly fell open. So he knew about her comedic aspirations, too. Judging by the way March smiled broadly, she guessed he had let that particular detail slip. Her heart swelled with gratitude and surprise at Conrad's gesture. After all of the night's chaos, this was the last thing she'd expected, a public endorsement from a man who had once seemed to doubt her role in any of this. When the applause died down, Conrad stepped off the stage with a gracious nod, disappearing into the throng of guests offering him handshakes and congratulations. Lavinia realized she was trembling slightly, not from anxiety, but from the sudden, dizzying wave of relief and elation. She turned to find March standing at her elbow, eyes shining with pride. "That was entirely his idea," he murmured, clearly anticipating her question. "I didn't even know he was planning to announce it." Unable to contain herself, Lavinia pulled him into a spontaneous hug. The cheering, the swirling music, the confetti cannons that fired in celebration of the record-breaking total, it all faded into a soft buzz in her mind. In that moment, the only thing that felt truly real was the warmth of March's arms around her, a private sanctuary in the midst of a high-profile gala. When she released him, her cheeks flushed with emotion, she saw that same sentiment reflected in his expression. Before either of them could speak, Darby dashed onto the stage, squealing with joy over the news. Photographers snapped pictures of Lavinia, March, and the rest of the committee. The atmosphere bristled with triumph and relief, the perfect emotional crescendo to a night that had threatened disaster at every turn. Eventually, the formalities wound down, and the ballroom began to empty as guests headed off to after-parties or home to their luxurious townhouses. Staff members buzzed about, gathering leftover programs and half-empty champagne flutes, while Lavinia and Darby supervised the teardown. The moment the last straggling donor disappeared through the doors, Lavinia let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the evening slip from her shoulders. She glanced at March, who'd remained by her side long after most sponsors and VIPs had departed. He looked comfortably out of place in his flawless tuxedo, rolling up his sleeves to help move a few chairs. The sight made her smile. This man, with all his resources and obligations, was staying until the end. When the final staff meeting concluded and Darby began ushering everyone off the premises, Lavinia and March found themselves in a quiet corner of the once bustling ballroom. Spent helium balloons drifted near the ceiling, and stray confetti sparkled underfoot. The hush felt surreal after hours of controlled pandemonium. "You sure you don't need to get back to your father?" she asked softly, resting a hand on the back of a chair. "I'm sure there's a victory celebration somewhere with champagne far better than what we served tonight." March shook his head, stepping closer. "I think I'd rather celebrate here," he said, voice gentle. "Preferably with you, after everything we've been through. Plus," he added with a playful tilt of his head, "I'm dying to see if you'll test out some new stand-up material on me, maybe about the many near disasters we tackled." Lavinia laughed, the sound echoing in the empty ballroom. "Oh, I'm already drafting a routine about ice sculpture CPR and soprano lock-ins," she teased. You have no idea how much comedic gold I got from tonight. His grin was dazzling. In that case, I'll be your biggest fan, and possibly your co-writer, if you'll have me. Suddenly the ballroom's emptiness felt intimate, like they stood at the center of a vast stage crafted just for them. She took a breath, nerves fluttering in her stomach. I'd like that, she said, heart pounding. Working with you, joking with you. I'm not sure I want it to end. March reached for her hand, his voice low and sincere. Who says it has to? For a moment, Lavinia thought of all the obstacles, his father's expectations, her demanding job, the swirl of responsibilities that would resume come morning. Yet in the calm after the storm, she realized they'd already proven they could navigate chaos together. Maybe that was all the proof they needed. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Then let's keep going, she whispered. Wherever this leads. With that, the last echoes of the gala's music seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet promise between them, an ending, yes, but also a beginning. And as they stepped through the deserted ballroom, past the remnants of a night filled with frenzied triumphs and blossoming connections, Lavinia allowed herself to hope that this partnership, forged in the flicker of stage lights and the hum of comedic mishaps, would guide them toward an encore far more meaningful than any gala could ever orchestrate.